Okay, good afternoon. So let me begin with a little bit about me. I was a late bloomer. Unlike many of you, I was almost 50 years old when I had my first entheogenic experience. Now, I use the word entheogen here specifically because I personally have never had a psychedelic experience outside of being in a spiritual or religious ceremony. So, moreover, I came into this whole altered state world through a mystery school. So I love the fact that I'm the counterpart of Martin's speech here, is that I started 15 years ago through this mystery school and learned the spiritual and shamanic uses of the entheogens from day one. So I was a retired Silicon Valley geek, and by all means a very skeptical agnostic. However, after 15 years of ayahuasca and mushrooms and peyote and San Pedro and cannabis and Blue Lotus, well, here I am today, a ordained minister in the entheogenic realms. So let me tell you a quick story about how I fell down this rabbit hole. It was about 2003, and I was my first ayahuasca ceremony. We were outside in the Sierras. I was excited, nervous, and touch terrified. Outside amongst about 60 people all dressed in white. It was twilight, and as the medicine began to come on, I could see the now familiar rainbow shimmer around the leaves. And then sometime later, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a huge white moth or butterfly literally kind of drift through the ceremonial circle. And I sat there and I go, that's not real. That couldn't possibly be real. Because I knew it was something that I had seen out of, I don't know, National Geographic. It was just not indigenous to the Sierras. So I said, cool, wow, that's my first hallucination. Awesome. Well, that was the only vision that I had like that evening. I certainly had lots of internal things happen, but anything visual like that, it was the only time I'd seen it. So the next day when our group gathered, as we normally would do after breakfast, I waited until the very end to timidly raise my hand and share my vision. About half a dozen other people raised their hands, and they had seen it as well. My world just stopped. That was it. It was over. I had to reset everything that I knew because I had seen something that had appeared and then vanished, and yet other people had seen that as well. Down the rabbit hole I tumbled. So what do we call shared, mutually verifiable experience? We call that reality. So I had to face the fact that I was not hallucinating, that I was simply seeing something that wasn't normally available to human sight, that the medicine had changed my perceptions. And over the next 7 years, as I was going through this program, I learned a great deal about that form of perception. So my talk today is about what we consider to be real. You see, we've all been raised with this social conditioning that says psychedelics are hallucinogenic. I'm here to tell you that may not necessarily be true. I've experienced countless instances of shared medicine visions, of apparitions, and yes, even entities. In the shamanic world, these are not considered to be hallucinations, but a glimmer of the reality that lies just beyond our limited three-dimensional perceptions. My indigenous teachers have taught me that the medicine experience is simply allowing me to perceive a much larger world. And it's up to me to do something with that perspective. Here's an example. So how many cat owners do we have in the audience? Just kind of raise your hands. Have you ever watched your cat as it saw something that you couldn't see? So I've literally watched my cat stare down an empty hallway, screaming and howling that there was something there. And yet I couldn't see it. Does that mean that it wasn't there? Just the cat's vision is far greater than mine, seeing a much greater spectrum. My point is, what is real? How do we perceive reality? Now, I hope you've all seen The Matrix, so if you advance the slide. I have just a couple of slides here, but they're just a couple. So I'm going to use a lot of references to The Matrix from 1999. So specifically, that reality is all in your head. In the movie, The Matrix is a computer-generated control program by this artificial intelligence. But according to a great deal of scientific research, especially since this movie, the Matrix is now actually believed to be the global consensus of perceptions which we all agree on, that which we call reality. Meaning that if only the cat and I, and me while stoned, perceive something in that hallway, society can't accept it as real since they can't see it. And because we're so programmed, so hopelessly trapped by consensus, that even I may eventually deny what I've seen was real. But I'm here to tell you that is about to change. Because we're not having hallucinations. We're beginning to see another dimension. Change slide, please. So, the father of quantum physics back in the 1800s said this: not only is the universe stranger than we think, it is stranger than we can think. So the reason we're able to have this conference today, and the reason you're here, is because we're having similar experiences in the medicine field. We're not having random, meaningless light shows in our brains. We're beginning to see and create consensus around our experiences. And that has not happened in 1700 years. So let me introduce quantum reality, or more specifically, the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation of quantum physics. Now, I could try to explain quantum physics, but I am not qualified, and it would take all afternoon long. Suffice it to say that science tells us that reality only occurs when it is observed. The universe is actually made up of probabilities, of probability waves, and it is our consciousness which creates form. Change slide. So, as Morpheus said in The Matrix, what is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste, what you can see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. Did that for Tom Hattis. So if reality is all inside of our heads, then altering our brain's chemistry and energetic state is going to change the way we perceive reality, right? Change slide, please. You may have seen this a couple years back. They started doing MRI studies on LSD and psilocybin. And of course, they showed incredible increases in not only blood flow, but actual neural activity within the brain. New neural pathways, new pattern recognition. What's going on here? If not allowing us to perceive reality differently than our normal state of consciousness. And it is. Right before his death, physicist Stephen Hawking began work on his mathematics of interdimensional and parallel realities. In brief, these theories were to revolve around the concept of multiple parallel dimensions, all coexisting right on top of this one, separated only by consciousness. More precisely, conscious decision. But more importantly, many physicists are beginning to define the universe as conscious, meaning that there is a quantum state of awareness in reality. Let me say that again. There is a quantum state of awareness to reality. And for the last 10,000 years, we've called that awareness God. Let's change the slide. In The Matrix, our protagonist, Neo, is offered the red pill to see true reality. And I'm not the first to note that psychedelic symbology. If reality is indeed created by our consciousness, then what happens when you chemically change the way your brain is perceiving reality? For the last 10 years, I've become rather obsessed with the concept of the mystical experience, specifically the entheogenic mystical experience, oneness, non-duality, samadhi, and the religious experience are all tightly related and may be just variations on a definition. But this perception of reality from beyond our own egos has led me, has left me fascinated. And most importantly, the consistency of the experience. So change the slide. William James was the coiner of the phrase, the mystical experience, and he spent most of his life as a philosopher working on his own fascination with mystical experience. And he identified 4 different items: that it was transient, that it was just temporary, and you'd feel normal outside of your mystical experience. Ineffable was that the experience could not adequately be explained in any way, that it was noetic, that the individual feels like they've learned something valuable and gained knowledge that's hidden and not available to normal people, and that it's passive. It happens to you and largely without your control. So feeling all blissed out, ecstatic, and one with the universe, other than that, what's the purpose of all this? Well, historically, I can tell you, it was all about the direct contact with the divine. Not just conversations with God, but perceiving the universe as God. Long before monotheism took over, it was quite normal to personally go out and converse with the gods. Prayer didn't used to be a passive petition. It was a dialogue. And the best way to do that was with some chemical help. The mystical experience can be attained in many different ways, but by far the most consistent is through entheogens. So, if we're all creating reality with our consciousness, and reality then is conscious, then our feeling of unity and cosmic connectedness is essentially a biofeedback loop. We're in the field, as my teachers say. And if you're plugged into the highest level of consciousness, that infinite cosmic power, why not take advantage of being there? All right. I'm talking about intention, will, manifestation, and magic. All possible, even probable, in the right setting. And my historical research indicates that is exactly what entheogens were used for at least the last 6,000 years. The priesthoods all had the best drugs, thousands of years worth of esoteric knowledge, and most importantly, awesome rituals. For a moment, I'd like you to suspend your disbelief and enter the world of subtle energy, much like what Martin was talking about. Because the universal quantum energy field, like George Lucas's The Force, surrounds us and binds us. In the shamanic worldview, we live in a multiverse of overlapping dimensions of energy. Accordingly, if we enter into an altered state, our brains may lose three-dimensional focus. Not only may we be perceiving other dimensions, but they may now be perceiving you. It is for this reason that in the shamanic world, ritual, ceremony, and casting of a protective barrier or a circle are the key elements of medicine work. And so it has been for thousands of years. I grew up on Carlos Castaneda and his tales of the Yaqui sorcerer Don Juan. I was a baby witch by the time I was a teenager. The concepts of magic came easily to me. I knew I was an old soul, and I was blessed to be born into a family who spoke freely of reincarnation and ESP. Many years later, when I joined this mystery school, and the corner candles were lit by walking the flame around the circle, oh, I knew exactly what they were doing. Because in Wicca, we create a sacred space by drawing a symbolic circle to contain our magical workings and to protect ourselves from the onslaughts of powers and entities outside our realm of perception. Literally, witches and sorcerers are creating a bubble of energy, a vortex between worlds for their work. When our medicine ceremony called for a sacred container, I knew exactly what to do. In 1961, Timothy Leary coined the term set and setting to describe the conditions which he believed responsible for over 80% of the psychedelic experience. Set is the mental state which the participant comes into the ceremony. It is their thoughts, their mood, their expectations, its intention. Setting is the physical and social environment, and in my world, that's ceremony. Meaning that there's a vast difference between dropping acid at a rock concert and doing so in a ceremonial way. In fact, lighting a simple candle tonight for when you have your cannabis can become quite literally a mystical event. After all, if reality is inside your head, then what we think and what we imagine can certainly become real if you believe it. It's why religious ceremonies work in the first place. They invoke our cultural and ancestral memories. 10 or 20,000 years worth of mystery work, of magical workings and ceremonies have worked their way into our DNA. Subtle energies and container theory is simply a way of tapping into that resource that's already there. It provides us with a common foundation of relating to an invisible realm, of giving us words and dialogue and a way of relating to this energy. So when I sit in front of my altar with the candles lit in the four directions, I'm invoking memories of the countless times I have performed these rituals down through the ages. The very intention of such thought is enough to create sacred space and change the ordinary into the mystical. But I also want to mention the shamanic belief that ritual and sacred container can shield the participants, you, from what are perceived to be parasitic entities. If indeed parallel dimensions are populated with energetic life forms, there could be very valid reasons for creating protected space. Now, if you think spiritual possession and energetic feeding is the stuff of movies, I wouldn't blame you. but then you haven't seen what I've seen. It's quite unnerving, to say the least. So the biggest reason I have selected this topic today is to share with you this information about container theory. The indigenous, shamanic, and mystical perspective that when you enter an altered state of consciousness, you are entering a swamp of energetic entities. And believe me, it's harder to clean them off than it is to shield yourself from them in the first place. So, in conclusion, it's been at least 1,700 years since we've been able to attend conferences like this, to speak openly on these subjects without the fear of being arrested, burned at the stake, or excommunicated by the church. Sociologically, this is a very big deal. The legalization of cannabis, MDMA, and soon psilocybin is going to change the world like we have never seen it change before. But I'd also like to point out that historically, this is not the first time entheogens have played a role in the advancement of civilization. Because it seems like that our greatest thinkers and philosophers of the ancient world were all born about 300 years together. From Buddha, Confucius, Lao Tzu in the East to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle in the West, the explosion of logic and intellect, of philosophy and spirituality has not been duplicated since. And we now know that entheogens had a major role in their society at the time. That sociological convergence may be brewing again today. Scientifically and sociologically, we are learning that it's quantum physics and consensus which creates our perception of reality, not any fixed, immutable state of matter. And our advancements in science have brought us to this place where quantum physics has met ancient mysticism and found agreement there. Our experiences in the medicine field are not random and chaotic, but consistent and verifiable. We are seeing the same things. We are feeling the same connections. We are sensing the same divine oneness. You are able to hear my words today because we have come to this intellectual point in history. So much so that what's happening is that this is now becoming real in not only this room, but our society. And because of this, we are beginning to see a new world, a new possibility, and perhaps even a new reality. Thank you very much.